Ethan and Lucas were inseparable throughout their childhood. They had been neighbors since birth, sharing everything from backyard adventures to late-night talks about their futures. Ethan's gift was evident from a young age. When he was only 5, he picked up his first violin, and in a matter of weeks, he was playing complex classical pieces. It wasn't just his musical ability. It was the ease with which he mastered anything he touched. Instruments, languages, sports. He excelled without effort. Teachers and mentors would shake their heads in disbelief, almost as though it was too good to be true. Ethan's father, a renowned musician in his own right, had recognized his son's talent early on. From the age of 8, Ethan was trained by the best in the business, his performances captivating audiences around the world. But Ethan didn't see it the way others did. To him, music was fun, something that came naturally, something he did when he felt like it. He didn't have to work at it. Everything just clicked. Even the most complicated pieces felt like child's play. He would sit at the grand piano in his family's living room, playing effortlessly, a smirk curling on his lips as his fingers moved over the keys like a master artist. Ethan's world seemed painted in perfect shades of talent, and he had never known struggle. Lucas, in stark contrast, didn't have the luxury of natural ability. From the moment he tried to pick up an instrument, he faced resistance. His first violin screeched horribly in his hands, the notes out of tune and uneven. But he loved music more than anything else. Every evening, after the sun set and the last remnants of daylight faded from the sky, Lucas would sit in his small bedroom, cradling his violin, pouring his heart into the strings. It was a slow, painstaking process. He wasn't a prodigy, and his fingers bled from the effort. But there was a fire in him, an unwavering belief that if he practiced enough, if he worked hard enough, he could get better, no matter how long it took. His parents weren't musicians, but they encouraged his passion. His father, a carpenter, taught him the value of persistence, the idea that nothing worth having came without effort. His mother, a teacher, instilled in him a quiet confidence, a belief that dedication would always outshine talent if given enough time. They told him that hard work was a trait that could outlast natural ability. Lucas didn't need a shortcut. He knew the road ahead would be long, and though the climb seemed impossible, he was determined to reach the top. Despite his hard work, Lucas was constantly overshadowed by Ethan's effortless success. At school, Ethan was the golden boy, the one everyone admired and envied. Teachers praised him endlessly, and classmates watched in awe as he played flawless concertos. He never seemed to break a sweat, and Lucas often found himself sitting on the sidelines, quietly watching, wondering if he would ever be enough. The harsh truth sat heavy on his chest. No matter how much he practiced, no matter how many hours he put in, he could never quite match Ethan's effortless brilliance. Still, Lucas refused to give up. His heart knew that talent, while impressive, wasn't everything. He couldn't control how quickly Ethan picked up a new instrument or how naturally he played. But he could control his own efforts. He could control his discipline. And he vowed, deep in his heart, that one day it wouldn't be Ethan's talent that set him apart. It would be his own relentless pursuit of greatness. He would work harder, longer, and more fiercely than anyone else. And one day, that would be enough. As Lucas entered high school, the divide between him and Ethan only grew wider. The town, once small and simple, had transformed into a place of expectations and competition. Ethan was now the star of every school event, every concert, and every gathering. His name was known far beyond the borders of their town, with music scouts regularly visiting to watch him perform. His reputation was legendary, but to Lucas, it often felt like a curse. Everywhere he went, he heard whispers of Ethan's brilliance. Have you heard Ethan play? He's going to make it big. He's got real talent. It was hard for Lucas to ignore. He had seen it all his life. Ethan's effortless ability to excel without breaking a sweat. Ethan didn't even seem to try, yet everything came so easily for him. Lucas, on the other hand, struggled to keep up. He had to fight for every note, for every melody that left his fingertips. While Ethan was praised for his natural abilities, Lucas was constantly reminded of how far behind he was. The self-doubt that had begun as a quiet whisper now became a constant, nagging presence in his mind. Was he good enough? Was he ever going to be enough? One afternoon, after hearing another group of students talk about Ethan's upcoming performance at a prestigious music festival, Lucas felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had been practicing his own music, pushing himself harder than ever. He had even written a few original pieces, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he could create something worthy of recognition. But the voices of doubt continued to plague him. They echoed in his mind, asking the same question over and over. What if it's never enough? Later that day, Lucas found himself sitting in the back of the school auditorium, watching Ethan as he effortlessly performed a complex concerto. His fingers moved like a blur across the piano keys, his expression serene and confident. The crowd, mesmerized, erupted into applause. Ethan stood and bowed, a smug smile playing on his lips as he absorbed the praise. Lucas couldn't help but admire the ease with which Ethan seemed to navigate life. He was everything Lucas was not. He had the talent, the charm, the attention of everyone in the room. Lucas, by contrast, was just another face in the crowd, fighting to be noticed. But as Lucas watched, something strange began to stir inside him. It wasn't jealousy, but a quiet realization, a flicker of understanding. It wasn't that Ethan didn't deserve his praise. It was that Ethan's talent, while extraordinary, wasn't the full picture. There was more to success than what could be seen on the surface. The way Ethan moved through the world, effortless, unchallenged, reminded Lucas of how little he had fought for what he had. What would happen if Ethan had to work as hard as I do? Lucas thought, what if the real secret to success wasn't just raw talent, but something deeper? Lucas left the auditorium that afternoon with a new resolve burning in his chest. He didn't want to be like Ethan. Not exactly. He didn't want to rely on talent alone. He wanted something more. He wanted to prove to himself that talent didn't make the difference. Discipline, that was the key. If he could stay consistent, keep pushing forward despite the odds, maybe, just maybe, he could catch up. Maybe he could surpass Ethan in ways that Ethan would never understand. The seed of determination was planted deep within Lucas. It wasn't about matching Ethan's effortless brilliance. It was about showing the world that hard work could outshine natural ability. He didn't need to be a prodigy. He just needed to keep pushing. And for the first time, Lucas felt like he had a real chance to do just that. The days leading up to the annual town music competition were filled with an electric anticipation that buzzed in the air. This year, the competition was more than just a showcase. It was a statement. Ethan had been the undisputed champion for years, winning every event with ease. His name was synonymous with excellence. But this time, Lucas was different. He had trained harder than ever before, pouring his soul into every practice session. His fingers, once clumsy, now moved with precision. His melodies, though imperfect, carried an emotional depth that no one could deny. It wasn't just about winning. For Lucas, the competition was a chance to prove something deeper, something beyond accolades or recognition. It was a chance to show that discipline, consistency, and unwavering dedication could be just as powerful as raw talent. He didn't expect to make Ethan's effortless brilliance look easy, but if he could play his heart out and leave everything on the stage, he would be able to live with the outcome, no matter what it was. On the night of the competition, the atmosphere in the auditorium was charged with excitement. The audience buzzed with whispers as the performers lined up backstage. Ethan, dressed in his usual polished attire, exuded a quiet confidence. He had a reputation to uphold, after all. He glanced at Lucas, who was standing slightly apart, his fingers nervously drumming against his music sheet. Ethan smirked but didn't say a word. There was no need to. He knew that he would win. It was a foregone conclusion. Lucas, however, was consumed with a sense of calm. His nerves were still there, but they had transformed into something else, a quiet, steely determination. He wasn't here to outshine Ethan. He was here to showcase the fruits of his labor, to prove that hours spent in solitude, sweating over his violin, would not be in vain. He could feel the weight of his promise to himself, the promise that he would work harder than anyone else, that discipline would carry him when talent fell short. The competition began, and Ethan was the first to take the stage. His performance was, as always, flawless. The audience watched in awe as his fingers danced across the piano, the notes perfectly executed with precision and elegance. It was effortless, breathtaking. But as the last note lingered in the air, there was something almost mechanical about it. The crowd erupted into applause, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Ethan had played beautifully, but he had played with the same smooth ease that he always did. There was no struggle, no emotion, just perfection. Then it was Lucas's turn. As he stepped onto the stage, the spotlight seemed to focus solely on him. His heart raced, but he didn't allow it to control him. He had trained for this moment. He had given everything he had. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and began. The first few notes were shaky, but as he continued, he found his rhythm. His violin, though not as polished as Ethan's piano, sang with raw emotion. Each note rang out with the weight of his years of struggle, his relentless effort. It wasn't perfect. It was far from it. But it was real. He poured his soul into the music, and the audience could feel it. Every imperfect note seemed to convey his passion, his sacrifice, his unyielding pursuit of something greater than himself. The music was messy, but it was honest. As the final note rang out, Lucas held his breath. He knew it wasn't the most technically perfect performance, but he had given everything. His heart was racing, his hands shaking, but there was a quiet pride that bloomed within him. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Then suddenly, the audience erupted into applause, not as loud as for Ethan, but more genuine, more moved. Lucas had done it. He had put his heart on the line, and in that moment, it felt like everything had changed. The competition wasn't just about who had the most flawless performance. It was about who could make the audience feel something. And for the first time, Lucas knew that what he had accomplished was far more than just a simple victory. He had taken a step closer to his goal of proving that discipline could overcome talent, and in his heart, he knew he had won something much more important than a trophy. He had won respect, and he was finally ready to face the truth. Discipline was the real game changer. The night after the competition, Lucas sat alone in his room, the echoes of the crowd's applause still ringing in his ears. It hadn't been the deafening ovation that Ethan received, but it had been something more. A genuine recognition of the heart and soul he had poured into his performance. Lucas leaned back in his chair, a quiet sense of disbelief washing over him. He had done it. Against all odds, he had stood on that stage and given everything he had. And it had been enough. The next day, the results were announced. Ethan had already been preparing for his next big performance, not even considering that there might be any competition for first place. He was, after all, Ethan, the prodigy, the genius, the one who always seemed to have everything handed to him. So when the judges announced Lucas's name as the winner, there was a stunned silence. At first, Lucas didn't believe it. He had won. Against Ethan. His heart pounded as he walked up to the stage, the weight of the victory suddenly heavy on his shoulders. He hadn't expected it, not really. He had hoped for it, yes, but the reality felt almost unreal. As the host handed him the trophy, Lucas felt a mix of emotions: pride, disbelief, and a strange sense of vindication. The audience clapped, some with genuine admiration, others with surprise. There were murmurs in the crowd, people exchanging glances, as though they weren't sure how to process the outcome. Ethan, standing off to the side, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had assumed this would be his competition, his easy win. But instead, here he was, watching his friend, his rival, take the prize. It was a moment that no one had expected. Ethan's first reaction was shock, followed by a flush of embarrassment. It wasn't just that Lucas had won. It was the realization that, somehow, Lucas had earned the victory not with talent, but with effort, with dedication. The very thing that Ethan had taken for granted. Ethan had always assumed that his raw ability would be enough to secure his success. And yet, here he was, second place, with no excuse except for his own complacency. Lucas, standing on the stage, met Ethan's gaze for a brief moment. There was no smugness, no triumphant smirk. He understood the weight of the moment. Winning wasn't about proving something to Ethan. It was about proving something to himself. It was about showing that talent alone wasn't enough. He had worked relentlessly for this moment, and it had paid off. But as he looked at Ethan, he saw the struggle in his friend's eyes. The realization that maybe, just maybe, Lucas had something that Ethan had never truly valued: discipline. The crowd began to disperse, and Lucas made his way back to the backstage area. As he passed Ethan, the two locked eyes again. This time, there was no tension, no competition, only a quiet understanding. Ethan nodded at Lucas, a small but genuine gesture of respect. Lucas returned the nod, his heart racing not from excitement but from something deeper. This wasn't the victory he had dreamed of, nor the one he had expected. It was far more meaningful. He had earned it. And for the first time, he realized that this moment had not only changed how the world saw him, but how he saw himself. Later that evening, as Lucas sat with his trophy, reflecting on the day's events, he understood the truth in his heart. Talent was a gift, but discipline was the key. He had just proven it, not with flawless technique or effortless genius, but with a relentless commitment to the process. And for the first time in his life, Lucas believed with every fiber of his being that discipline could, indeed, beat talent. And it had. Ethan, for all his gifts, had learned something important that day too. The unspoken lesson had sunk in deeper than any victory could. Talent was only part of the equation. Hard work, perseverance, and the refusal to ever give up were what truly separated the great from the good. And in that moment, both friends understood the real meaning of success. It wasn't about winning. It was about the journey and the effort that it took to get there. The weeks following the competition were a quiet turning point for both Lucas and Ethan. Though Lucas had been crowned the victor, the effects of the event ran much deeper than any trophy could represent. For Lucas, the taste of success was bittersweet. He had proven his point, but the path ahead still stretched long and uncertain. While he had achieved a personal victory, he was far from finished. He could feel the pressure building inside him, the need to continue pushing, to never let complacency take root. For Ethan, the result of the competition was a wake-up call. He had spent most of his life gliding by on his natural abilities, assuming that talent alone would always carry him to the top. But Lucas's win had shaken him to his core. In the weeks after the competition, Ethan started practicing in ways he never had before. Every day, he pushed himself to new limits, not just refining his technique, but honing his discipline. He woke up earlier, stayed up later, and began to embrace the long hours of practice that Lucas had always endured. He sought out mentors, read books about mastering his craft, and immersed himself in the music like never before. It wasn't easy. Ethan had to confront the truth about himself, that he had been living in the comfort of his talent for too long. The realization stung, but it also fueled him. He could no longer coast through life, expecting success to find him. He had seen it in Lucas's eyes, the hunger, the fire, the relentless pursuit of improvement. It wasn't that Ethan wanted to be better than Lucas. It was that he wanted to be the best version of himself. He wanted to prove that he could rise to the occasion, not just through natural ability, but through the same dedication that Lucas had shown. Lucas, on the other hand, didn't let his victory define him. He didn't rest on his laurels. didn't believe that winning one competition meant he had achieved everything. He had learned that true growth wasn't about a singular moment of success. It was about constant improvement. And so, he continued practicing, always pushing himself further, never allowing himself to become complacent. His hands grew stronger, his music more intricate, but more importantly, his focus remained unwavering. He could see that his journey was far from over. The two friends, once divided by their differences, now found themselves walking similar paths. They would meet in the same music hall, at the same studio, side by side, but now as equals. Ethan's technical prowess had deepened, now tempered with the understanding that practice, rather than inherent genius, was the true key to mastery. Lucas's music, once filled with struggle and uncertainty, was now refined and graceful, though still full of the passion that had carried him through the years of hard work. They often spent hours together, playing side by side. Ethan would challenge Lucas with more complex pieces, while Lucas would remind Ethan of the importance of emotional depth over perfection. Both learned from the other. Ethan showed Lucas the value of refining one's natural ability, and Lucas reminded Ethan that the road to greatness was never easy, never without effort. One evening, after a particularly long practice session, they sat in silence, both drenched in sweat, but both content. Ethan spoke first, his voice quieter than usual. "I always thought I'd be the one to get to the top, Lucas. I thought it would always come easy." Lucas smiled, his fingers still lightly caressing the strings of his violin. "I think we both learned something today." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, talent's important, but it's nothing without discipline." They sat there for a while longer, both lost in their thoughts. The competition was long behind them, but what they had gained from it was something that couldn't be measured in applause or trophies. They had discovered something that went beyond music, beyond even their rivalry. They had learned that true success wasn't about who could play the fastest or the most flawlessly. It was about who could persevere, who could endure, and who could push through the long nights when no one was watching. That was what mattered. And in that moment, both Ethan and Lucas understood that the real victory was not the one awarded in a competition, but the one earned every day through hard work, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to improvement. They weren't just musicians anymore. They were craftsmen, masters of their art, and perhaps most importantly, lifelong students of the lesson that discipline always beats talent. As time passed, Lucas and Ethan's transformation was undeniable. Both had changed in ways that went beyond their music, beyond their talents. The journey they had shared, the struggles they had faced, and the lessons they had learned had reshaped their lives. They were no longer the carefree boys they once were, one basking in effortless success, the other fighting for every inch. They had become something more, true musicians, dedicated to their craft in a way they had never thought possible. But it wasn't just the music that had evolved. Their friendship, once grounded in rivalry and comparison, had blossomed into a deep mutual respect. They no longer saw each other as competitors, but as fellow travelers on the same road, both learning from one another, both pushing each other to grow. It was during one of their late-night practice sessions, long after their performances, when the final lesson revealed itself, one neither had expected. They had been playing for hours, testing their limits, sharing insights and techniques, when Ethan suddenly stopped, his fingers hovering over the keys. "Lucas," he said, his voice soft but serious. "You know / I've been thinking a lot about what we've gone through, and I don't think we've just been learning about music." Lucas raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the shift in his friend's tone. He put down his violin, setting it gently on the chair beside him. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, his usual confidence replaced by something quieter, more reflective. "I think the real lesson here isn't just that talent and discipline are different. It's that life itself is kind of like what we've been through. Things don't always come easy. We don't always get the results we want when we want them, but that doesn't mean we stop." Lucas nodded, understanding immediately. "Yeah, we've been so focused on mastering our craft, on getting better at what we do, that we forgot why we started in the first place. It wasn't about winning or being the best. It was about doing what we love, and doing it well, no matter what. Ethan smiled, his eyes meeting Lucas. Exactly. In the beginning, we thought it was all about the competition, the recognition. But what we've really learned is that it's about the journey, the discipline to keep going, the courage to face failure, and the heart to keep playing even when no one's watching. Lucas felt a sense of peace settle over him, something he hadn't felt before. All the struggles, the doubts, the hours of practice, it had all led to this. The realization that it was never about being perfect, never about outrunning someone else's success. It was about embracing the process, no matter how hard it got. It was about enjoying the small victories, the progress, and the moments of growth that came with each passing day. The two friends sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the music no longer their focus, but the bigger picture. The final lesson wasn't just that discipline had beaten talent, it was that the process of becoming better, of growing, was the true reward. In the end, it wasn't about competing with each other, or anyone else for that matter. It was about the pursuit of mastery, of self-improvement, and the understanding that true success is measured not in trophies, but in the effort to become the best version of yourself. Lucas picked up his violin, and Ethan, too, sat back down at the piano. They didn't speak again. There was nothing more to say. They had learned what they needed to learn. And as the music began once more, their hearts were aligned in a way they hadn't been before, no longer driven by rivalry, but by a shared understanding of what it meant to truly master something. The world outside may have demanded perfection, but in this moment, they realized that the journey, the struggle, and the discipline would always be more important than the destination. Their passion for music, for growth, for life itself, was what truly mattered, and that, in the end, was enough.